Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where should we turn to? First of all, I just want to give an addendum to this morning's news video, and we heard about strikes across Ukraine with regard to Shahid drones, cruise missiles, and S-300 and S-400 ballistic missiles. Now, all the cruise missiles were taken out. I was talking about how could it be that they're now being used much more as a sacrificial role. So they're trying to find out where air defenses are because they're just not getting through, particularly commonly. The drones, actually, a number did get through, but it depends where the drones are flown at. If they are trying to attack Kiev, they generally get taken out. But if there are other places that are targeted, then depends how good the air defenses are around there. They even hit in eastern Ukraine quite a bit. And then the S-300, S-400 ballistic missiles that tend to get through because you need something like a Patriot to take them out. Well, here we have Dnipro that gets hit quite consistently. Indeed, it's one of the places that gets hit quite consistently with S-300, S-400 surface-to-air missiles used in their ground-to-ground capability. And just to let you know where Dnipro is, sorry, I should have had the map up previously. It's just there in that kind of central eastern area of Ukraine, and so therefore it's just about it's in target of S-300s, S-400s, as well as Zaporizhia gets hit quite a bit by such missiles, and Kharkiv. Those are the three places that seem to be favoured targets for those ballistic missiles. Well, in Dnipro, a clinic has been hit, a medical facility. One person's died, 23 people injured. You can see some pretty horrible photos of that, and an apartment block next to it. Now, these are notoriously inaccurate missiles when used in that way, and then leads to questions of why use that kind of missile to do that job if you know it's that inaccurate. I guess the answer is, well, because they know it will get through. At least these missiles won't get shot down, even if they know they'll be grossly inaccurate and cause more civilian damage than they do military damage. But, it's just images like this that make you think, oh, this whole war is a terrible thing, isn't it? And Russia just lobbing missiles over into enemy, as they see enemy territory, just indiscriminately hitting such places. There's just horrible. Anyway, that's just adding on to a bit more, giving a bit more detail about the damage that the Russians have done overnight. Now, this is a thread that I've found quite, uh, worthy of looking into. Interesting stuff. So, withstanding an impact, NATO versus Soviet-made APCs, armored personnel carriers, statistical analysis of Ukraine's losses. The percentage risk of fire in APCs that have been damaged or destroyed. So someone's done predominantly looking at the Oryx open source data for these losses and working out, how catastrophic damage to these vehicles can be. And the M113 APC. So it turns out that some of these older bits of kit, certainly when you're looking at the American or NATO stuff, the older it is, the less likely it is to have serious explosions and fire. So the M113 APCs, the oldest, 52% risk. The updated YPL 765, the Dutch have given these. These are basically updated M113s, 62% risk. And then we go to look at the old Soviet, though, NTLB APC, 85% risk. That's really high. So then when you're talking about your wounded and dead KIA and WIA statistics, when you look at this, if you're driving around one of these Russian bits of kit, you're more likely to have a catastrophic, fire after being hit than with some of the Ukrainian kit. And that may lead towards having different wounded and killed in action statistics. Previous statistical analysis from the Ukraine war explosion risk in Russian tanks. So this guy's done this back in January. Let's just have a look at that image. So T62, and again, you have the newer the tank here, the greater the risk, and this shows it far more than the previous one. So T62, 16% risk, T64A, 32% risk, T80, 68% risk, T80 BVM, 59% risk, T72 59, T72B 62, T72B3 57, and T90 62.5% risk. In other words, you want to be driving a T62, T64 if you're going to get hit. Okay, it might have thinner armor and not have as much reactive armor. I don't know, but there's less chance of there being catastrophic explosions. This could be to do with the auto loader, which is around the turret. That then, if that all goes off, then you have some pretty horrific explosions. But anyway, that's an analysis there. The percentage risk of fire for internal explosions in Ukraine APCs that have been damaged and destroyed, and then talks through the data that we've just had a look at. And there you go. So there's no point me reading you all of that data. Just something to pique your interest there. Okay, moving on. I'm going to show you a couple of videos that have been doing arounds. This is, at first, Ukrainian soldiers could not believe their eyes. So some drone footage of Russians here. The occupiers returned to their dead brother to take him away. But as it turned out, they evacuated only what was needed, which in this case was a watch. So the idea was that these guys were going to come back and take their fallen comrade away. Again, can I verify this 100% isn't some kind of science video? No, but you know, absent of any defeaters, I would assume that the intuitions about this are correct. As I mentioned before, that's something called um, phenomenal conservatism. So I'm gonna believe my intuitions because I've got pretty decent reason to believe my intuitions. It seems like it's true and absent of a defeater. So unless you give me actual evidence that this ain't true, then I'll believe it as being true. And here we see the two Russian guys steal a watch and then randomly run in different directions. I don't know whether they've spotted the drone there because they seem pretty calm beforehand. So there's a high chance they've spotted or heard the drone. Right, and here we have another bit of footage of Russian soldiers. This is at the canal at Klishchivka. Russian soldiers drinking from a dirty puddle is either just pure dumbness or an attempt for a free ticket to the infirmary in order to evade combat, probably both. One of them is already wounded in action, and this happened near Klishchivka. Right, let's watch this video. So you got that wounded guy there drinking out their helmets from this canal, and then messing around, or I don't know what they're doing, and then they drag their poor fallen colleague, comrade, through the water, through that muddy water. That does win some good, and then up the bank and away. Yeah, always healthy to drink from something that looks like that, I find. But there's been a lot of talk about, a lot of video footage suggesting from Russians themselves, primary source evidence, saying that they, haven't had water in 3 days, haven't been given food, so on and so forth. That's why some say that's why they go and do so much looting. A lot of it's to do with the food and water, and just they're not being provided that by their own forces. Okay. Little thread, not too long, from Chris Owicki on the Russian Volunteer Corps attacking over the border into Belgorod. The extraordinary success of the Russian Volunteer Corps in taking over a chunk of the Russian border for a day and a half was reportedly due to it being virtually undefended. It was guarded by only 25 men, 23 of whom were barely trained conscripts. The VCHK OGPU Telegram channel, this is a Russian Telegram channel that Chris O gets quite a lot of information from, has posted a conversation with the mother of 18-year-old Karelian conscript Ivan F., who was wounded in the clashes. It was reported that he was conscripted in November 2022, was assigned to the unit 91711, the 272nd Motorized Rifle Regiment. According to the Telegram channel, quote, the conscripts were in the fields, likely meaning sitting in tents, until the 17th of February 2023. After that, in complete secrecy, recruits from the military unit were scattered to different points to guard the border. Thus, 25 men, including only one lieutenant and one mobilized man, were guarding the Griveron district, while the rest, including Ivan, were conscript soldiers. When Ivan was wounded by shelling, his mother says his lieutenant shoved him in a car and drove him into the hospital with some guy. Then the lieutenant kind of went back there to the other guys. So this speaks to the idea that there's quite a lot of confusion in well, a lack of coherence with manning these units. Uh, no one seems to quite know what's going on around the borders. I mean, there was just the whole reaction to this from the Russians was one of panic and a lack of organization, I think. And I'm still not sold over this whole incident. I still don't know really what to think about the whole Belgorod incursion thing. But I guess overall, it probably has been quite successful in freaking out the Russians, in getting them to fix troops into the area. It also shows that really, if the Ukrainians wanted to attack into Russia, it would be relatively easy to do so. It's a massive border. They're not going to be guarding. They're evidently not guarding it particularly well, and the level of their troops that they have is pretty low. So not only in number but in quality. So actually, the Ukrainians could cause some merry havoc right up and down that border, um, and it keeps the Russians on their toes. If you can do unpredictable things, that's a really good thing for an army. In conflict, if the opposition can't predict what you're going to do, they're left trying to cover lots of bases because they're not 100% sure what's going on. This is why I think you'll see that there won't be, like Podolyak said yesterday, there won't be one major uh, thrust to the offensive. I think there'll be several because if the Russians just know they're going to attack at Zaporizhia, then that makes it far easier for them to defend against. Whereas if there's going to be a whole potential list of places that the Ukrainians could attack, and then in some sense do attack, then it keeps the Russians on their feet and unable to defend all these places as effectively as they'd like. But talking about what happened in Belgorod, here is some incredible footage from a drone, by the looks of it, of two Su-34 bombers flying really, really low and dropping bombs on Griveron. I don't think these bombs did particularly any damage, but how low these jets are flying is quite incredible. As you can see there, really low, releasing those. Oops, sorry, really low, releasing those bombs. As you can see, I'll play that again. Comes in from the left, from the right, really low, ultra low flying, and releases those bombs. I don't know if those are the two vehicles that got stuck. That might not have been Griver, it might have been further south. And then more bombs just dropped in the field. I mean, the accuracy of these bombs, I don't really know what they're trying to hit there. Is this more for show? Hey, we've called in the jets, and then a few more landing in the area. I don't know whether they maybe I don't know what sort of munition, whether there were time fuses on them, delayed fuses, who knows? But yeah, continuing to blow up afterwards. Yeah, that's some Russian jets doing their thing in their own country. Who knew that Russia would be invaded after making that decision on February the 24th last year? Right here, this is a little bit of a moral dilemma here. So this is a British photographer turned volunteer. He's trying to work out his accent actually, and his team. I mean, Yves York, so I think he probably has Ukrainian heritage. And his team evacuate civilians from front lines in Ukraine. In an exclusive interview with reporter Irina Matveyishin of the Kyiv Independent, he shares his experiences. Okay, let's listen to them. Let's get him turned up. Right.
Bakhmut, and it was a difficult case because so we came to the address, and first we got the mom out because she was very frail, and we evacuated her, and she died maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. And then we came back, and the daughter wanted to leave by that point, but her dad didn't want to leave. And we were like, hey, look, if you stay here, like chances are you're gonna die. Like it's not a joke. It was before the winter, very bad conditions. They were living in an apartment block. If you're living in a private house, you can kind of make do. But if you're living in an apartment block, ooh,
Yeah.
you're really tough conditions. And
That's probably due to apartment blocks use centralized municipal heating. So a lot of places in Ukraine, you don't have individual heating. Your heating is provided municipally or by the council or whatever, and they heat the entire block. But of course, in war zones, when that's not taking place, and those apartment blocks are proper cold, and that's I think what he's talking about there.
she's faced with a really tough decision. She turns to me and she says, hey, what should I do? It's my dad. I don't want to leave him. What would you do? And I'm in a difficult situation because I'm kind of, deciding people's lives right then and there.
And that's fascinating. So this guy, who's just a guy volunteering and evacuating, is being asked for his opinion, and that's how this person is, grounding their decision. In other words, he's making a moral decision on behalf of other people, and that gives you a lot of responsibility. And if that decision goes wrong, then that gives you some psychological issues to deal with for sure. And indeed, he continues. So in the end, she left.
Um, so in the end, she left, and her dad, he died within 2 or 3 weeks just from the cold. He literally froze to death.
There you go. I mean, he said, "Yeah, I think you should leave," and she left. But obviously, the dad remains, and it just goes to show how horrific these conditions are up and down the front line, where you've got places in the war zone. I saw some footage from Bakhmut just the other day of I think 3 civilians trying to negotiate themselves around a corner in Bakhmut. You're like, what are you still doing in Bakhmut now? Absolutely insane. And yeah, people are left behind, and quite often it's the most vulnerable in those communities: the old, the infirm, the mentally challenged, people who have mental health issues, and people who have nowhere else to go, people that have no connections, no family, no friends elsewhere. These are the people that are often the last to leave war zones. People who've got money, who have got youth and health and the wherewithal and the ability to leave and be set up somewhere else. Okay, they'll get out fine. Don't worry about them. But the vulnerable in those communities are the most liable to be left behind, and therefore the most liable to fall victim to the war, as you can see there. Yeah. Right. Moving on. This is a Russian woman living in the US wrote, Bakhmut is ours. Thank you, Wagner, on her garage in order to upset the Ukrainian neighbors that live on the same street as her. What a horrible person. The Ukrainians tell her, how can you write that after so many children have been killed? And quite so here is the incident. I mean, I don't know what they're saying, obviously, but you get the sense. Why would you do that?
Ну, это такой месседж, это такой месседж написать, это надо быть таким, ну, полностью дебилом. Как? Сейчас увидите, что мы хотим?
Поехали, мы вам покажем солдат. Поехали, мы вам сейчас покажем солдат без ног.
So on and so forth, and more people come along and filming that and whatnot. And the point for me is, aside from like, what kind of human would you have to be to say that? I mean, then it comes. So it's like explanation, not justification, isn't it? So when people do like morally dubious things, it's very easy to just be very judgmental and say, "Oh, you're a horrible person." But what's going on there? What are the drivers? What's this person's world where they feel that that's the right thing to do? And we can get into debates about free will here, and it gets really complicated. And you talk about actually, there's no such thing as moral responsibility. There is morality, but I don't want to get too philosophically technical there. But when you fully understand why someone does something, and that's what they're always going to do in the situation they're in, given the person they are, given all their background, their learning, their genes, all that blizzard of variables in their life up to that moment, then they're always going to do that. And so, therefore, this kind of calls into question. I mean, this is the free will debate, right? It calls into question blameworthiness and praiseworthiness. So when someone does anything and you go, "That's awesome, well done, you are brilliant," or "That's terrible, you are horrible," actually that doesn't make sense in terms of a deterministic understanding of reality. Okay, now I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I don't think there's such a thing as libertarian free will. However, it's really difficult to get away from the illusion of free will. And so when you look at someone like this, my initial reaction is, God, you're a horrible human being. But then I sit back and go, okay, but what's going on here? She's living in some kind of bubble, some kind of information bubble. And what's fascinating for me is that she's living in the US where she's got access to Western media. But then even within the US, she can watch Western media and say, pick a particular news channel and get a particular narrative about what's going on in Ukraine. We've talked earlier before about Tucker Carlson, for example. You know, she might watch particular things that are going to confirm her worldview, or she's got access to the internet, so and VPNs and whatnot. She can just sit and watch RT and Russian news channels on the internet, and so therefore she can surround herself with the messaging that fits her narrative, and she might have some great national pride. It's not to take that way, you know. Many people have lots of great national pride, and she's proud to be Russian. She's living in America in the same way that those Ukrainians are probably proud to be Ukrainian living in America. But she's feeding herself on a narrative that then confirms her. You know, it's just this big vicious circle that ends up a place like this, where she feels so strongly for the Russians and feels that they're doing the right thing, and the Ukrainians are the bad guys, just like someone living in the middle of, you know, some oblast in Russia will think the same thing because they're fed the same information that they end up. You know, remember at the beginning of the war when people were phoning up relatives in Russia saying, "Hey, we're being bombed literally right now," and the relatives are like, "No, you're not. It's not what it says on TV." And so they'd rather believe their own state television narrative than their own relative phoning them literally as a primary source going, "I am being bombed." It's like, "No, you're not." And again, we can look at that person saying, "No, you're not," and blame them and say, "Oh, you're a horrible person." And they might actually be a horrible person in the way that the physical characteristics are, or whatever mental characteristics are. But you know, the more important question is, how did you get to that point where you are saying that? What explains how you're saying that? And then when we're looking forward into trying to deal with the aftermath of this war, how can we stop that from happening again? But also, how can we cure the ailment of that positive information that you have? How can we make Russia better again? Do you know what I mean? Like, assuming that Ukraine will prevail, assuming there'll be some political upheaval, and assuming that Putin might be replaced by someone better. And all of those are not certain at all, particularly the last one. You might end up with an even more nationalistic, militaristic leader after Putin. But imagine a world where, you know, Russia doesn't prevail, limps out of Ukraine, licks its wounds, and then eventually says, "Okay, we want to reintegrate into global society." What how do you deal with the mess that's the domestic information landscape in Russia, and how do you deal with all the horrific views that so many people in Russia have. I talked to you yesterday about Krasovsky, or whatever his name is, the former director of broadcasting for RT, who's advocating genocide and the burning and drowning of children. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you cure that? Do you have to just wait for that generation to die, like naturally, like natural wastage, and get the young in? But the young, we know, are being taught in the schools in Russia horrific stuff. I remember Ukraine the latest having people on to talk about this and discussing how actually, you know, the Daily Telegraph podcast on the Ukraine war, talking about how this is a really big problem because this is being sustained by a propagandist education of the young, where they're being brainwashed and poisoned with this narrative. And so, to to kind of improve that situation, to cure that situation, I don't know what you have to do. There'd have to be some fundamentally, some really fundamental changes in Russia, in Russian society, in the education system, in the information landscape. That I just don't know how you tackle that. Anyway, that's me banging on. Sorry, going off on one completely there. Um, I do, I do appreciate that you indulge me in my fanciful uh, streams of consciousness. And apologies if you've got bored and jogged on. Right, so let's finish this uh, meandering chat with something positive here. And yes, this is kind of schmaltzy propagandist almost, but this is real, this happens, and this is delightful. And yes, this can happen with Russian soldiers as well, of course. And I'm going to have to mute that because there'll be a copyright claim. And then it's sad because actually you do get some voice in the back, but just look at this little girl's face. Endearing. Oh. And there are plenty of videos like this that are just, really reflective of how terrible war is in destroying families. I mean, this is a lucky situation where someone gets to return to their family alive and well and say, hey, I'm back. Daddy's back. Have lovely hugs. Children are reunited. Families are reunited. But how many families are torn apart? How many families have people who their dad or mother has been maimed? Children as well. In fact, we're talking about civilian. We've just seen terrible images of the Dnipro being attacked by probably S-300 missiles indiscriminately, and you will have people who won't return to their families, who will return but missing a limb or with cognitive issues or whatever. It just was this. What a senseless thing this is. For what? For what, Putin? What are you going to achieve now? Like, you can't achieve what you set out to achieve. You're not going to control Ukraine. You're not going to have your puppet government set up. That's never going to happen now. It is impossible for that to be achieved. So what are you doing now? Why are you ruining people's lives, your own soldiers' lives, your own Russian population, the families of those soldiers that are never going to see their fathers again, that are sent, that are mobilized and conscripted, or drawn, stolen from prisons? Those people are never going to return to their families. And for what? For what gain? Yeah, sorry to rant again, but there you go. Anyway, thanks for, as I say, for indulging. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much to the members. It's particularly gratifying because actually I seem to be getting targeted by YouTube again. My news video today, there's nothing wrong with it. It's been demonetized. 5 out of the last 8 of my videos or something were demonetized, and then I appeal, and then they turn the decision around quite often. Most of the time they go, oh yeah, no, it's fine. But after that, everyone's already watched it. So, and then they put the adverts on. I know adverts are annoying for you, but at the end of the day, I spend 5 hours a day plus doing this. And so, that's really important to me. And it seems like YouTube are doing that almost on purpose, or the algorithm is just screwing me over. And then when some of you tell me, it'd be interesting to see, let me know down below if this is an issue. So many people are saying, I don't get notifications of any of your videos. I have to physically come and find you and, you know, type in and go to your channel rather than getting a notification. So I say, press the bell and do all the things you know, other YouTubers say. And it's not getting out there. Why is that? What does YouTube have against me? I don't know. But it is really frustrating. Anyway, thank you so much nonetheless for those who do watch. Really appreciate that. And thank you to the members. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.